I'll start this show with a statement that has been said by many who were in the know at the time. Those who saw Frank Albert play football say he was the greatest left-handed quarterback ever to play the game. I usually keep dates and current events out of my episodes, but I would be remiss if I did not mention that today is September 4th, and on this day in 2002, Frank Albert passed away in hospice near his home in Palo Alto, not far from his alma mater. LA Rams linebacker Don Paul compared Frank to Fran Tarkenton and said this: "At least with Tarkenton, you know he had the ball. With Frank Albert, we weren't always sure. And then he would stand there and laugh at you." It's hard to find a photo of Frank not smiling. When researching for the show, I noticed the date of Mr. Albert's passing and thought I should put out this show honoring him for all he's done. Now on with the intro. I was talking about how real football people knew how special he was, even though it was obvious to the casual fan by the way he played. That was over 70 years ago, and it would be a long time before another lefty QB that good would come along and play in the NFL. Then came Steve Young, also a 49er. He's in the Hall of Fame. Just like Steve and Joe Montana would battle for the QB1 spot, so would Frank Albert and a young Y.A. Tittle, with Frank usually winning that battle. In 1950, Frank Albert would start all 12 games and be selected to play in the 1950 Inaugural NFL Pro Bowl game. Frank Cullen Albert, nicknamed Frankie, was the number 10 pick overall by the Chicago Bears in the 1942 NFL Draft. He was born in Chicago but raised in Glendale, California. He would attend Stanford University and as a sophomore in 1939 played tailback on a team that had only one victory all season. Things would change for the Indians down at the farm because in 1940 they got a new head coach named Clark Shaughnessy, known as the father of the T formation. He saw how Frankie, who was only 5'9" and 166 pounds, would fit in perfect with his plans to turn around Stanford's football program, making Frank Albert the first modern quarterback in college football to use the T formation. Frank was a triple threat. He could pass, run, and kick. But what set him apart from others who also did this was his ball handling skills. Coach Shaughnessy called him the magician because of his sleight of hand skills with the football. It was the legendary Coach Pop Warner who invented the bootleg while coaching at Stanford back in the 1920s, but it's Frank Albert who is credited with perfecting the bootleg during that 1940 historic season under Coach Shaughnessy. Speaking of the coach, in his first season as head coach of the Indians, he took a team that had one win the previous season to a team that went undefeated and would be invited down to Pasadena to play in the Rose Bowl, where they would beat Nebraska to finish the season 10-0. That's the biggest one-year turnaround in college history. Frank was All-American in 1940 and in 1941, and his 1940 season was good enough to place him third in the Heisman voting. After graduating from Stanford, Frank Albert would serve his country by enlisting in the Navy and would miss out on 4 prime years of his football career. That's a long time away from the game. Back home in California and ready to play some football in 1945, he'd head down south and QB for the LA Bulldogs of the Pacific Coast Professional Football League. But in 1946, a new league was formed to compete with the NFL called the All-American Football Conference. There was 8 teams, with San Francisco 49ers being one of them, and they chose Frank Albert as the first pick in franchise history. They had some great players in that league, but it only lasted 4 seasons, and Frank was all-pro in every one of them. His best year was 1948, when he was named the league's MVP, sharing that honor with Cleveland Browns QB Otto Graham. How good was Frank's 1948 season? He led the league in passer rating and in completion percentage and set a league record scoring 29 touchdowns. In a game in 1949 against the Cleveland Browns, Frankie scored 5 touchdowns, setting another record. And he led the league in punting with a 48-yard average that year. Now it's 1950, and there's only a few of the AAFC teams that are invited to join the NFL. And football in America will only have to deal with one more upstart league in 1960 before it turns into the NFL we know now. Is football as good now as it was in the 1950s and 60s and the 70s? No. I say no. Do better players make for a better product? Of course. But the league has put in so many rules and regulations that it confuses and hampers a player's effectiveness, making it harder for them to play the game the way it was supposed to be played. Your job is to try and take the guy's head off, in a matter of speaking. Too violent? Okay, how about this then? Your job is to separate him from his cleats. Either way, you're not supposed to be thinking in a split second, what's the best way I can not hurt this guy as I try to stop his forward progress while at the same time he is trying to run me over with all his might. It doesn't make sense. I play JV football. Football is a rough sport. Lots of contact in practice. Then on those Friday night games, those were brutal. Kids trying to kill other kids. But wait, then the varsity team came out and played their game. That was a whole other level of violent contact. NFL players know what they signed up for: money and head trauma. It just depends on how much you want of each and when you think you've had enough of one or the other. What we have today is a watered-down version of what football used to be. One of the best parts of a football game was the kickoff at the start of each half and after every score. That was taken away when they changed the rule, forcing players to stand like statues and wait until the ball is kicked off, and then head on downfield. No longer do you see 11 guys in unison, all running up at the kicker as he kicks the ball into play as the players get a running start for their attack. And another thing, here we go. It used to be men playing for the love of the game. Making a little cash was a nice plus, because they all had jobs in the off-season. They knew they weren't going to get rich playing football. But that didn't matter. They weren't playing football to get rich. I think it gets back to the fact that almost all of these guys served in the military, and they know what it means to be part of a team that has a common goal that is bigger than one individual. It was all about the team and the mission at hand, not individual accolades. Sure, there were big stars on every team back then, but they did not act like big stars. Now it's all about how much money I can make and take. Fame and accolades, commercials and endorsements, branding your name. Whatever happened to team loyalty? What it comes down to with this generation, the mentality is, doesn't matter what team I'm on as long as I get mine. That's not good for leagues and franchises when stars have no team loyalty and just chase the dollar every year until they retire. Our dad has 2 of Mr. Albert's autographs. He has one in the autograph book that you see in the thumbnail, and the one I showed you before on a Seal scorebook. Frank Albert would spend his last year playing football in Canada for the Calgary Stampeders. He was a 49er for 7 seasons and scored 115 touchdowns, 27 of those rushing. Frank Albert is in the College Football Hall of Fame, as well as the Stanford Hall of Fame and San Jose State's Hall of Fame. Dad has a few 49er souvenir programs from 1952 with Frank in them. That was his last season in the NFL. Frank Albert would be an assistant coach for the 49ers in 1955, and then was head coach from 1956 to 1958. Frank Albert is the very first San Francisco 49er in franchise history. Recently, I showed you a black and white photo I took of my friend Mike and a stripper up in San Francisco back in 1984. I took that picture without a flash. Here's a photo I took using a flash and color film. This photo is from the year 2000. I haven't touched my camera since. Note the flash photography. I hadn't used my camera in over a decade when I took this photo. Not too bad for a former minor league photographer who gave up on what could have been a fun and exciting career just so he could get a steady job. Next time, Tom. Note the cigarette. Eyes closed. Doesn't get any better than that.